Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Catholic Passage podcast. My name is John Sandy, and I'm today's host. With me is Nathan Beacom. And Nathan, I will try not to call you Noah, which I believe is your brother, who I may have
Yeah.
went to college with as well. But I'm with Nathan Beacom, who is with an organization called the Lyceum Movement. And Nathan, I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And I'm one of 10 kids, so I'm very used to being called the wrong name.
How many children or siblings do you have that like start with the letter M? N as in
uh,
Nancy.
yeah. Well, let's see. There's just three of us, but they're all like, if they're not, what's the word, alliterative, they're assonant. So they either rhyme or they start with the same letter, pretty much.
Oh man, I bet that made your like teachers in school go crazy when they had all of you guys.
Yeah, I just had to get used to being called Noah or Nick or whatever.
Now, Nathan, you grew up in Des Moines, or describe your background a little bit if you could.
Yeah, I grew up in Des Moines. I was born in Sioux City. That's the part of the state where my family kind of comes from. But grew up in Des Moines since I was a little kid. I went to Dowling High School here, and then I went to the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. Um, Studied philosophy and Catholic studies up there, and then eventually did a master's at U Chicago in social thought. So that's kind of my education.
Now, Nathan, what is the Lyceum movement? And how did you get involved with that? Are there other movements? Kind of describe the structure of that and like your role within that organization.
Yeah, so the Lyceum movement is based off of a historical movement by the same name. The original Lyceum was founded in 1826, which makes this the 200th anniversary. Um, in Connecticut, it was founded by a farmer. And there was this thing in early America at the time that was like everybody was forming new clubs and associations and stuff. And this one was like, well, if you're not already like the son of a rich New Englander, you probably aren't going to college. So how can we live an intellectual life outside of the university and kind of uplift the educational, cultural level of the citizenry of the United States? Um, and so I was inspired by that idea. And in 2021, this thing had kind of long disappeared in history. I decided that, it would be a good time to try to revive something like that, especially in, after COVID and in the culture of the political tensions and stuff. Could we get people who come from different backgrounds, different viewpoints into a room together to kind of talk about the first principles that have to do with our shared life in America?
And so, as I understand it, the historical Lyceum movement in the 19th century was about adult education and civic engagement, not necessarily with adolescent or teaching the youth. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right. It was for people who are in the working world.
And so, given that, how do these types of lectures and conversations differ than like what you may see in a collegiate setting, for example, or the university?
Yeah. I would say they differ in a couple ways. One is that they're not kind of presuming a certain background. They're very, I think, substantive and rich, but they're not assuming that you've gone through a certain course of studies. Um, and then the other part, I guess, is there's no homework and there's no tests.
And like one of the monikers that I love of the organization is places where the city comes to think. I love that phrase, where the city comes
Yeah,
to
thank you.
think. What does that look like in practice? What's the format by which you kind of achieve that?
Yeah, we have a couple different formats. We do kind of the main thing that will happen is we'll have a topic and then we'll present a conversation on that topic rather than a lecture. And so we'll have, this past Saturday, we had one that was about what what is the proper meaning of these words civility and tolerance. And we had the head of the philosophy department at Iowa State and the head of the political science department at Iowa State. So we'll have people coming at things from different angles, and we'll have a kind of dialogue up front with people who have some expertise. And then people kind of engage those topics amongst themselves with the other people who came. So some events are like that. We also do kind of almost like a seminar where we'll have a scholar come and kind of lead a group study. Like last year, we did one on ancient philosophy, and then this year we had one on existentialists. So yeah, a couple different things.
And so, if I may, like, is there a personal story or moment that kind of like clicked with you where you're like, this is something I want to start in Des Moines of all places? Because as
Yeah.
I understand it, is there a Lyceum movement in the Twin Cities at all?
Yes. So that's our other main
Okay.
location, and we've had events in other cities too, but the Des Moines and St. Paul are the main places.
So is there something that occurred that kind of sparked this? Was it your time at St. Thomas? Was it no, it didn't really have anything to do with my Catholic studies major that led me in this direction? Like, can you describe that? Like, why this of all things that you could be doing?
Yes. So I studied Catholic studies and philosophy because I had this sense, well, even when I was in high school, that a lot of people lacked a framework for making sense of their lives, um, and for having kind of a meaningful direction. And, I discovered all of this, like in the philosophical world, I discovered Aristotle and virtue ethics and the Stoics and all these things. And then in Catholic studies, all that tradition had kind of been taken up and then elevated in certain ways into this greater kind of social concern for solidarity with people. And um, initially, I thought, well, maybe the way to kind of be a part of this is to become a college professor and help young students, who are just kind of going through life on automatic mode and jumping through the hoops that you're supposed to jump through, find a more meaningful way of life. And I got to the end of my university time, and my mentor there at St. Thomas said, I unless you were willing to crawl a mile over broken glass to do this professor thing, really, I just would say don't do it because there's no jobs. Um, so I went to then work in public policy for a while, and I just this kind of desire to, bring people these insights from philosophical thinking, and then this thing of like watching how our country was coming apart in terms of people's ability to use the same terms, think with the same ideas, have productive conversations at all. As I discovered this kind of historical thing, I thought, well, in our moment where people are isolated, people are divided, and people are in search of meaning, maybe this is something that can respond to those things.
Yeah, and I think a central theme in your work seems to not just be ideas, but like relationship. Like that's one thing that when I think of the Lyceum, I think it's like a relational organization. And what I mean by that is it builds human connection in a time where many people feel polarized. And so, how have you seen those conversations impact people personally and socially as a community?
Yeah. So yeah, what we're trying to do would not work as, if we just sent out like books, or if we just put out videos. And people have asked us sometimes like, why don't you just live stream all of this? And it's like, because then you wouldn't come. And it's that, it's essential that the ideas are engaged with, like you said, in a real physical relational encounter. um, Part of the problem is that people are encountering all this news and all this stuff in an isolated way, and they don't know how to deal with it or how to make sense of it. And so they start to, you know, stereotype other people and sort themselves into certain ways of thinking. And if you can get in a room and be relational, um, you're able to better, your ideas get sharper, but you're also able to see other people as full human beings and see where they're coming from. Um, so yeah, the relational aspect is definitely important because I think what we're responding to is a multi-layered thing about, like I mentioned, loneliness and polarization and things like that. And we're not talking about like hot button political issues. We're saying, can we come together and form friendships while pursuing the truth? Is maybe a way of summarizing it.
And to that end, do you think there's a uniquely Catholic role in that kind of civic, I call it civic healing,
Hmm.
in ways, but like, or intellectual hospitality maybe is a better
Mm.
way to phrase it. Do you think that there's something uniquely Catholic in that?
Yeah, so the Lyceum itself is ecumenical, broad based thing, not a specifically Catholic thing. Um, but for me personally, like I mentioned, the idea of solidarity, and the idea of subsidiarity too, where these discussions about big ideas or whatever, they shouldn't just be had online or on national television shows or whatever. They should be had person to person in local places and local contexts. Um, and then I think, you know, maybe maybe a bit more from like a theological perspective. Um, there's this interplay between grace and nature where uh, we want to kind of create a fertile soil for human flourishing, and that involves relationship and also our capacity to know, to understand. And so that kind of whether you're Catholic or not, that kind of human formation is worthwhile. And then from a Catholic perspective, if you see the logos everywhere, if you see that the logic of Christ is in all things, then nothing is foreign to the faith. Nothing that's good or true that's out there is foreign to the faith. And so anywhere where people can see true and beautiful things and form relationships is part of that.
So when did you start? Is it fair to say you started the Lyceum movement in Des Moines? Is that fair to say?
Yes, I started the Lyceum in its current existence iteration. We put it, you might see on our posters, founded in 1826, refounded 2021. So we're claiming
And
continuity.
I want to talk about that a little bit. Like, so you get your master's at Chicago. In what year did you get your master's degree?
Oh, I actually had started the Lyceum prior to that. I got
Okay.
the master's in 2023,
Okay. And so you graduate from St. Thomas in what year then?
2016.
Okay. And so in 2021, this pops up. Do you just like, hey, I'm going to go to GoDaddy or whatever that is, get a
Yeah.
website and, hire a marketer, create some material, like describe kind of how this thing like actually came to be. Cause I'm just
Mm.
envisioning you in like an apartment, like, with some friends thinking this would be a great idea. What do I need to do to get this off the ground and go to the next stage? How does that even come about to where it is now, right?
Yeah, that's basically right. Just sitting in my apartment. um, so yeah, 2021, and like I said, I was working in public policy on the state level. And initially, when I started, I was, yeah, well, how do I do this? And I just started kind of calling random people who might know or have some insight into like how I could do this. Um, and I talked to, okay, well, who are the local people and who's on city government or whatever? How do I host events and get people to come? And initially, the first thing I heard from all the like local leaders and stuff is like, nope, this just won't work. This is people don't go to events anymore. Nobody comes to city council. Um, this is a nice idea, but it's just impossible. So that wasn't very helpful. But I kind of just decided that couldn't be correct. Um, so yeah, I bought a web domain and I just started kind of designing what would be the format of all of this, what would be the content of it. And the other side of it, kind of that going to knocking on these doors and saying, how do I do this? Will it work? Well, it won't. So go home. The other side of that is then kind of approaching some of these people like who we have speak it's been very encouraging to see a lot of people are willing to donate their time and come do it, and people who are have all kinds of like expertise and are scholars or leaders or officials or whatever, did really seem willing to do it. So yeah, I think it just kind of started by trying to get the word out organically and inviting these interesting people. And when the first ever event, I put a op-ed in the Des Moines Register making a case that, hey, look how angry everybody is and like how bad at talking to each other we are. Come to this venue on Thursday night or whatever.
And so, like, that's kind of what like, so, like, do you just rent a venue, for these kind of what I call pop-up discourses? Is that kind of what you do, Nathan?
Yeah, so we rent a venue. We're really fortunate now, and we've got a relationship with the brewery here, Big Grove Brewery, who will donate space to nonprofit, like community nonprofits.
And then obviously there's maybe a registration fee to help cover, like, the basic cost or whatever it might be, right?
Yep, it's all volunteer, but it costs money for marketing and for getting the speakers here and all kinds of different things. So there's a $12 usually fee for those monthly events that people register for.
And so, like, I know it can be kind of abstract to people that are listening that may have no exposure to this, but what would be like a topic, let's say that, like, give me an example of something you've done more
Yeah.
recently that would just be one. I mean, I understand it changes, but could you give me an example of something so that our listeners kind of get a feel for, like, okay, that's what we're talking about?
Yeah. So I would say there's kind of a couple buckets of topics. One type of topic is like the one I mentioned, like uh we had an event on what's the point of America. And so it's like we have all these arguments, whatever, whatever. We always try to take things down to like first principles, basic questions. Does this country have a point? Does it have a purpose? And what would that be? And starting from there, then you could think about other specific applications. So for that, we had um, uh, a Democrat public official and a Republican public official, and then a political scientist kind of in between. What are each of these perspectives? Where are these people coming from on what's the point of this country? What are we doing here together? Um, and are there differences and commonalities, stuff like that. And then the other kind of bucket is um, so there's kind of the common good bucket, and then there's like the humanities bucket. So as an example of that, we had a philosopher from Iowa State do a series last fall on the theological virtues. So a session on what is the meaning of faith? Is it a virtue? Is it a virtue that's accessible to people who don't like explicitly belong to the Christian faith? Um, and same thing with hope and love. What role do these play in our normal lives, even outside of a specifically um, like explicitly religious context? So, in other words, you'd be going and you'd be getting that common good stuff, but you'd also be getting what is like, you'd pay X amount of money to have access to these scholars somewhere in a university setting. Um, One way I kind of describe it is like if you've listened to, I'm trying to think of a good example, but everybody's got their podcast where, the host will interview a historian or a expert on this and that. And that's kind of what our events are like, except they're live and they're interactive.
Right. And so to that end, like, is there a particular conversation or session that you've had where the direction that you thought it would go in
Mhm.
planning and picking themes and organizing it, like, afterwards you're like, wow, that was not at all what I thought that would be, or it just surprised you maybe in how it unfolded? Can you think
Mm.
of anything of that sort? Or
Yeah.
am I maybe, like, is that too controversial in and of itself?
No, I'm trying to think. Um, one of the surprising things is like people ask like, "Oh, well, don't people get upset at each other and like shout and yell and whatever?" We really do have a diverse group of people who are I've watched a progressive secular, LGBT interested person talk to a traditionalist type Catholic in dialogue about some issue of human flourishing at the Lyceum, and it's not like nobody's coming to blows. It's like, actually, wow, this is really thoughtful, and they're taking each other seriously. Um, so that's what we hope to cultivate. I think in um, the thing that comes to mind most immediately is this event last weekend where, like I said, civility and tolerance and peace. And I thought we might talk a little bit more about like the civility thing because people are interested in, peaceful dialogue or whatever. But it ended up being a lot, almost more philosophical about this idea of tolerance. Like, is tolerance itself a virtue? Is it a good thing? And how would we know if we're a diverse society? How would we know what the boundaries are on what we should tolerate and what we shouldn't? Like, if there's something I disagree with, should I be like, well, that's their thing, this is my thing? Or what's the point at which, uh, as a social group, we decide, no, that part actually isn't tolerable. So I thought that ended up being really interesting, and people were thinking in terms of stuff. It was a general conversation, but I think that was applicable to really concrete stuff that's going on too.
Yeah, and I think, from a Catholic perspective, right, like, both JP2 and Benedict XVI talked extensively about moral relativism, right? Well, what does that look like when we're talking about tolerance in a secular society with the secular government, so to speak, right? Like, or at least not a faith-based, government.
Sure.
That's a requirement, so to speak. How do you hold those two things in tension? Um, but that's where I think I go back to, and I think I spoke to this a little bit when you invited me to speak in kind of terms of what's the role of the government, right? And at least the judicial side of things. And, whether it's judicial, legislative, I think it's true for just democratic society more generally. The role is not for the government to spoon feed, in my opinion, an ethos to the people.
Yeah.
It's for the people to elect representatives, enact legislation through the democratic voting process to manifest and reflect their ethos, right? And
Yes.
so,
Yes.
I was interviewed more recently on a podcast, and I hope I wasn't being too dramatic or controversial, but I sort of ended it because the host was kind of asking me to treat the Constitution almost as if it was like sola scriptura, right?
Mm,
Like, like it's like a divinely inspired document of sorts.
mhm,
And I said, "I think that that's really dangerous." And, like, John Yoo,
hmm,
for example, shares some of these same sentiments I do and has expressed it more eloquently because he's a genius and I'm not. But the point is, or at least he's very bright. But the point he was making is, the Constitution in 300 years could be Satan's manifesto. The point is it a reflection of the will of the people?
hmm.
Whereas, Scripture's the divinely inspired word of God, right? And in such is infallible in that way. Um, the Constitution is not that. And I think that we do a great disservice by using them interchangeably. Um, I don't know if that makes sense, but I do think that the distinction matters. And so I guess my whole point, what's the point in all of this, John? My point in all of this is at the end of the day, the Constitution is what the people say it is.
Mhm.
And I think that was my point to your group. It's not what a judge says it is. Right? It's not what the legislator says it is. It's what the people say it is. Okay? Through their vote, through their enactments, through their collective, right? And so if you have a problem with that, the answer isn't to assassinate somebody. The answer isn't, to break the law necessarily. Although I do think that that is questionable depending, for example, like Dr. Martin Luther King broke the law, but what was he
Yes.
really doing? Like, okay, he assembled,
Right.
but my point simply is it's your job then, your moral imperative is to change the hearts and minds of your fellow citizens in
Yeah.
the public sphere. And really, isn't that the core of what the Lyceum movement is? It's an
Hmm.
opportunity to kind of put this out there and say, said contra, you say this, but I say that. And to
Hmm.
have this exchange of ideas where it's not necessarily about winning or losing, but it's about trying
Right.
to, in good faith, I think, get to the bottom of something, right? In
Right.
earnest. And to say,
Right.
if I'm wrong, I'll change my opinion. I mean, that's the problem, I think, with today is both in the faith realm, but also in the civic secular realm. We start with our conclusion that we're not moving away from and enter into a battle to show that the other side's wrong. Instead of going into the debate or the dialogue with the understanding that we both want to get to truth, but be
Hmm.
honest to how we feel in doing so and be intellectually honest and do it with
Yeah.
integrity. And so long as we abide by the rules of logic, intellectual integrity, and these types of things, and keeping an open mind that we could be wrong, but also not betraying our convictions or our conscience, how do we
Hmm.
enter into this dialogue in good faith? That's
Yes.
a
Yeah.
lost art that I think 200 years ago existed. I
Yeah.
think back to when John Adams and Thomas Jefferson went after each other
Hmm.
about the role of the federal government, the role of France with and what the American role should be in the French Revolution, for example.
Yeah.
Hotly contested. And I dare say, you know, Jefferson, as much as he's beloved, if he had his way, if John Adams had not existed to stop
Yes.
Jefferson with his French revolutionary ideas, he would have taken America, in my opinion, we would have not been a country.
Yeah.
We would have faltered and fell because we would have embroiled ourselves in the French Revolution to our detriment and to our downfall eventually. If there's one geniusness of John Adams, it's that he kept us from ourselves. He kept us out of the French Revolution and I think saved America in so doing. Um, and so I think that I think though that art of dialogue and honest debate and coming from that good place has been lost. And that's why I think what you're doing, Nathan, is so important to the big picture, so to speak. Not just in matters of faith, but in matters of things that are important, right? Like what is
Hmm.
the point of America? I mean, isn't that a great question, right? Like
Hmm.
we can talk about all of this, but at the end of the day, like, okay, but is there American exceptionalism? Like, what does that mean? And
Right.
is there something different between us and, say, Canada? And if so, what is that? Do we care?
Right.
Right? I don't know.
Right. And I
Sorry for the
think
tangent.
no, that's all right. And I think there's a lot I agree on your historical assessment as far as I'm on the team of John Adams as well there. But the cool thing, is they had this really sharp, intense set of disagreements, and at a certain point they stopped talking to each other because they were so
Right.
fed up with each other. But there was an invitation to encounter one another again, and they took it and they talked and talked throughout their old age. And John Adams, like, slowly, grudgingly kind of brought Thomas Jefferson more to his point of view. And they ended the best of friends. Both died within hours of each other, 50 days or 50 years to the day on July 4th from the founding of the country, which is kind of a wild thing. But uh, it also came up, what you mentioned, Martin Luther King came up in the discussion on Saturday. Um, and it was a similar point from the political science professor that how do we determine the boundaries of tolerance and our values together? It is precisely through that effort of shared creation that is supposed to occur in our political system and our legislature, where there we bargain with each other, we compromise, we convince, we cajole, whatever. That's the process where we as a community try to come to conclusions together. And so the role, if you think something is wrong, is not to, like you said, take up arms and try to coerce everybody to doing it your way. It's to persuade, to change culture, to be in dialogue. And I think that is very Catholic as well. And I look at especially, the writings of John Paul too, and he goes into all these places in the world where there's conflict. and trouble, and people have given up on the process of dialogue. And the one I think of most recently, because I was reading about it, is the Irish Troubles. And he goes there and tries to make this plea is that the more, when you guys try to solve these issues, you both feel such a sense of injustice here. And when you try to solve it with bombs and guns, you're undermining everything that you're undermining virtue, you're undermining peace, you're undermining the common good. So please, he said, let's try to find a different way to work out our issues that isn't violent, that isn't war, and not give up on the possibility of, like you said, reasoning together. So from that perspective, I think it is like an expression of Catholic social teaching to try to cultivate a society where people can have out their differences in peaceful and reasonable ways, and not through coercion and violence and things like that.
Well, and I think you saw that with John Paul II in terms of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Like, everybody talks
Mhm,
about Reagan. I don't
mhm,
know. I'm not diminishing Reagan's role in that, but I think just as equal, or if not more, was John Paul II coming from Poland, right? Coming from that environment, and exerting, and now that I think about it, isn't that a great example of sort of faith and reason within the public life,
mhm.
to effectuate change, right? Um, do you think there's a distinct way, Nathan, that Catholics specifically can model that kind of civil engagement? Not just, I mean, yeah, I understand JP2 and the fall of the Berlin Wall is the extreme, right?
Right.
Um, but more at a micro level here in Des Moines, right? In Okoboji, Iowa, wherever you may
Mhm.
be. Do you think that there's a way in which Catholics can kind of impact that civil, engagement?
Yeah, I think it's that thing of being called to be salt of the earth and light of the world, that a Catholic in the public sphere should bring all of the charity of Christ to bear. Like that's what I would hope the witness of a Catholic would be, is um, somebody, whatever like the winds and moods are of politics that's going on, somebody who maintains charity and care for the person as an image of God. Um, and if that can have a broader impact, it's not a sectarian, like it's not coming in and forcing people to do things or proselytizing, but it's witnessing through a way of life that treats other people as image bearers of God, and that includes treating other people as reasoners and people who are persuadable. Maybe not everyone in like the concrete instance is ready to be acting in good faith and ready to be persuaded. But if you treat the other person as an image of God, I think that's a good place to start. And then I think the other thing I would say is there's just a lot of richness, like not just, you can read whatever Catholic media or whatever stuff online you want, but like in the actual compendium of the social teaching of the church and the things that John Paul II and the recent popes have said, there's a lot of resources for how to engage in a pluralistic society as a Catholic and bring light and salt to those contexts.
So what's next for the Lyceum movement? Like, do you have events, expansion, collaborations you're going to be doing? Like, where do you see the movement heading in the next few years?
Yeah. So in the immediate term, we have these events at least monthly. We have the Des Moines Festival of Ideas in August, which is what you came and spoke at last year. So that's a bigger event, a kind of weekend long event with speakers from all over. Um, and part of the goal is to. You said like, well, why start this? Why start it in Des Moines of all places? Um, Des Moines is where I'm from, and I had this moment when I was younger where I thought, well, what was the population of Florence when Michelangelo and Raphael and philosophers and stuff were coming out of it? It was smaller than Des Moines, and we have a mindset like, oh, we're a small city, nothing, important stuff happens in New York or whatever. Um, but I was like, no, this is in Des Moines. You could cultivate a ground from which you have all these really wonderful conversations and serious thinking, and people might come out of that and produce works of art or books or whatever. So, like from a vision perspective, the hope is to grow it into in Des Moines to the point where it's having a cultural effect on the city of like the original Lyceum, preparing people to be better thinkers and reasoners together, enriching their minds in intellectual investigation. Um, and then down the road, we'd like to grow that in St. Paul, and it'd be uh, an amazing thing if we could be in Chicago and St. Louis and Kansas City and things like that, kind of cultivating the virtues that we talked about.
So that the audience knows, I did not give Nathan like a script. So this next question, it'll be the last question, but I don't mean to catch you off guard. But what's a book, idea, or conversation that's influenced you in the last year?
Mm,
Let's say last year, and like why?
yeah. Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is the book Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville. And I think it influenced me because he came to America in the 1830s, so around the time where the Lyceum just started. And he's kind of long been held to be one of the most perceptive observers as somebody who's coming from outside America, from France, of what's our whole deal in America? What's our what's our culture? What's our vibe? Where do our impulses and inclinations and habits, where are they going to lead us? What are the like temptations as Americans we're prone to that we have to watch out for? What are our strengths? Um, and he was coming actually as a person too of a Catholic background, but who saw in America this great potential for people who were from Catholic backgrounds, but other backgrounds too, um, to create a society that had this healthy idea of freedom and liberty and this healthy idea of flourishing and community. And I think he just had some pretty incredible and still relevant insights into how in America we need to have these things together: community and the individual spirit, liberty, and also order and law, all kind of going together. And for him, a key way to do that was what would be the worst thing that could happen is a bunch of isolated individuals who aren't in a community together in a very powerful state, and that's all there is. So what you need is all these in-between institutions, clubs, churches, associations, whatever, and that's like where the real kind of stuff of the community life happens. And so, obviously the Lyceum is one effort, but I also always say like, uh you can help the common good, you can help the nation by, like, joining a softball team and, having something in your life where you're just building relationships that aren't around your, like, political affiliation.
Well, Nathan, thank you for being on the Catholic Passage. And for the listening audience, where can folks learn more about the Lyceum movement?
Yeah, we're at lyceummovement.org, and then if you type Lyceum Movement into most of the social platforms, you'll find us there and updates on events and things like that.
Well, thank you again, Nathan, and I appreciate the renewed sense uh, to the listening audience. Hopefully, that they have a thoughtful discourse in all matters, whether faith or otherwise. And I appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation, John, and thanks for also being a part of the Lyceum.